Okay, we are on with Zac. Zac, I'm going to take a stab at your name because I haven't heard it. Ooh, geez. Guignard. No. How do I say your last name?
Pretty close. It's just Zac Guignard. The second G is silent. It's a French last name.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Zac Guignard. Okay, French. Damn, that second G got me. So Zac, thank you for
everybody.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I'm like, how am I going to do it? So Zac, thank you for doing this. I'm just going to kind of jump right in here because you're an interesting character. You're a young guy who's up to some pretty serious, I would say, like some pretty serious global topics that you are discussing and seem to be interested in. So for those people listening who don't know you, haven't heard about you yet, can you just give us a brief intro? Like, who are you and what are you doing? And then I'll ask you why you're doing what you're doing. But yeah, who are you and what are you doing?
Yeah. Well, as you said, my name is Zac Guignard. I am a recent economics graduate from the University of Victoria. So I was about halfway through my degree in economics where I fell down the proverbial Bitcoin rabbit hole, which was really interesting.
That must have been rough. Yeah, that must have been rough. Taking an economics degree and then going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole.
Yeah,
wow.
I like to kind of think I have a foot in each door and these kind of different sides of economics. Let's just say a lot of assumptions I had and things I had learned in my degree were flipped on their head after discovering Bitcoin, for sure. But basically, I fell down the rabbit hole about halfway through my degree. And once I had felt like I'd kind of built a strong enough base knowledge about Bitcoin and its fundamentals, I took charge of the local Bitcoin club we have at the university. And this is kind of how I first got into the Bitcoin scene and kind of became a Bitcoiner, if you will. So I started that to kind of offer a space and opportunities for students to engage with Bitcoin, both from like an educational perspective and a social perspective and a professional perspective. So we alternated basically social and educational meetups with students, helping people understand Bitcoin, right from the basics. A lot of students are definitely like coming at this from like a very elementary perspective. Like Bitcoin's in this weird stage in the world right now where absolutely everyone's heard about Bitcoin, but very few have actually dedicated the time to study it and understand this like on the profound level that many of us have. And so that was sort of the goal with the club in university. And that sort of blossomed into me starting to write my own publication, The Bitconomist, where I was leveraging my knowledge of economics and Bitcoin to write about Bitcoin and its impact, both socially and economically, and kind of like how it can address the problems we're facing today. Because, I mean, when I first discovered Bitcoin, right from the get-go, I was like, this is really interesting. We have a decentralized currency limited to 21 million coins outside of anybody else's control. This has the potential to impact our lives individually and as a society in ways I had never even thought were possible. I was looking around at the world and seeing problems like wealth inequality, high inflation, burgeoning debt. Like there's so many economic issues that I was looking at that all seem to be stemming from our economic system itself, which is a really weird kind of concept. And so I was in search for solutions, and Bitcoin is what I found. And since then, I mean, it's been about, I guess, 4 years now that I've been in the Bitcoin space. I've taken on quite a few different endeavors.
Okay, so I'm going to pause you there, and we're going to get into those in 1 second. When you were at university, did you table any of these topics with the professors? I'm curious. Just Bitcoin or some of the thinking, even if you didn't mention Bitcoin, some of your thought process around economics and money and some of the fundamental flaws in it? Or no, did you not even broker it?
I definitely tried. I gave it a worthwhile effort, I'd like to say. So I did bring it up. I brought Bitcoin up specifically, like it's saying Bitcoin in my economics classes to my economics professors. The overwhelming majority of them were very skeptical of Bitcoin. But that stemmed from the fact that they had not taken the time to understand it, not that they actually had very serious critiques of Bitcoin's monetary properties or the way it functions. They were very elementary critiques, like this is deterring investment from other parts of the economy, or this is,
or there's no cash flow. It's not there's no
exactly. Yeah.
There's no income component to it, so it's not worth anything because Warren Buffett says so. Yeah,
because he called it rat poison squared. But exactly those sorts of things, or like people can't manage seed phrase. It's too much responsibility. So very, very surface level arguments. There were a couple profs that I was able to grab a coffee with and dive into these a little bit more deeper and kind of have some interesting conversations where there was, like a light bulb went off for them. And I really hope that since I've graduated over the last, year or so, they were able to kind of I haven't followed up, but I hope that they kind of looked into Bitcoin a little bit more. That being said, there were some professors outside of the economics department that were much more open-minded to Bitcoin. So actually, I had a finance class that I took in my second year, right as I had just discovered Bitcoin, and they dedicated, just happenstance, at the end of the course, they had a bonus module about Bitcoin, and they took it very seriously, and they were talking about Bitcoin as money. And talking about its merits and how it worked.
Oh, wow.
And that really solidified, because I was very early on in my journey at the time, that solidified it hey, my professors are even talking about this. So this is legitimate. I'm not crazy. Someone with a large amount of knowledge in the finance area is interested in this. So that was a really, really cool moment there. And then in my last semester, I actually had an exam taught by a younger teacher. I believe we were his first class ever. And it was money and banking. It's a fundamental course that all econ students take. It's it's pretty basic. So I didn't bother taking it until the end of my degree, because I already kind of knew all this stuff because I had already been down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and really thought about how our financial system works. But basically, they included a couple slides in one of the chapters on Bitcoin. And then when the midterm exam rolled around, imagine my surprise when I opened the page and the first question is asking us to describe Bitcoin as money, make the argument for Bitcoin as money. Yeah. And so that day, 60.
There is hope. There is hope. Wow.
Absolutely. It's getting there. And so that day, 60 plus economics students sat down and had to make the case for Bitcoin as money for Marx. And I think that was hopefully people are thinking about that, because that's one of the themes that I noticed within economics in an academic setting, is that we don't question the money we use at all.
I think that's what got me. Sorry, I'm jumping in here on you. I think I had started studying gold in 2008 during the great financial crisis, because I was like, oh my gosh, our family got caught in the real estate mess here in the 1990s in Canada. And then in 2008, when my brother and I, Nick, had just started this business, we got caught in this great financial crisis. And we thought, never again. We need to understand macroeconomics and how is this money thing work? And oh my gosh, it's debt. And then why was gold money? And then you outline the characteristics of gold. And then I had never really looked at Bitcoin's characteristics before. So even though I knew why gold was maybe a good form of sound money, I had never really written out all the characteristics that make gold good and understood that Bitcoin was better in basically every single way. And I think it was going through that process that I thought, holy smokes, no one ever told me there was a finite amount. No one ever told me that it was decentralized to the point where there's all these small little nodes running the ledger, duplicated globally. So if the government was to try and shut it down or centralize it, it would be freaking hard to go around the world with a sledgehammer and smash all of these ledgers all around the world that everyone's running individually. So once you started going through that process, then Bitcoin just takes on this new life, and you go down deeper in your understanding of money. Is it a ledger? What is money? What is happening here? So it really makes you think and makes you freak out. That's what Bitcoin does. So it sounds like you're fortunate enough that at your age, you've gone down this path early, which is great.
Yeah, I consider myself very fortunate to be where I am now. I don't know, if I ever could have predicted this. Even halfway through my degree, I don't think I ever could have expected being at where I am now. And Yeah,
I'm going to ask you what you're doing next. But there's something about people your age that I find fascinating. We have this conversation in the office quite a little bit. In the area of Toronto that we are in, there's some families that bought farmland like in the 1960s and 70s on the outskirts of Toronto. Those families got really, really rich as Toronto grew, and those like acres and acres of farmland that were bought for, in today's dollars, not much back then. Those families became rich as shopping malls and condos and hospitals were built on them. So much so that like some hospital wings now in Mississauga have these families' names on the side of them and that kind of stuff, right? But in the 1960s, when those families were buying this property out in the middle of nowhere, they were, I'm sure, laughed at by some of their friends. They may have, tried to, maybe they had doubts themselves of what they were doing, but they did this. And then, 20, 30 years passed and it's like, holy smokes, it went from almost worthless farmland on the outskirts of Toronto to like very precious property. And I was telling some of the younger guys in here that like you guys are sitting in this opportunity where the younger generation looks at older generations and thinks, I'll never be able to buy real estate. But that generation doesn't understand that you have the opportunity that those people had in the 1960s where you can buy digital property now and everyone's going to look at you like you're crazy and you don't know what you're talking about. And like that will never be worth anything. And all you have to do is really kind of be patient and just like sit on that property because it's finite and it's much better property than farmland on the edges of Toronto. And then one day you're likely going to wake up, and obviously I don't have a crystal ball and I cannot guarantee this, but one day you're likely going to wake up going, oh my gosh, like I have a sizable amount of wealth. And this is kind of a very unique opportunity for younger people to grab onto something that an older generation has or a big percentage of the older generation has no understanding of. So it's like a unique opportunity right now too. And then it's global, and we can get into the whole global thing and like all the injustices around the world.
Well, you're absolutely correct. You've hit the nail on the head there, Tom. This is a tremendous opportunity for a generation that I would say has gotten the short end of the stick in so many ways. I mean, the state of the world today, I mean, I know that this is sort of a reoccurring theme within generations where they feel like the world is worse today than it's ever been. It definitely is. Yes. But I am confident in saying that Gen Z has inherited a world that is worse than all of the generations before.
It's currently pretty messed up. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you're completely correct, too, when you said, like, most people I know do not think they will ever be able to afford a home like that. The goal and dream of home ownership has completely left the terminal. People have basically just accepted that they will never own a home. And it's really depressing for sure. And it feels like we missed the boat on so many different things, whether that, like the investing in early stage internet, and the gains that came from things like in the .com era, or housing since 2008 that has just skyrocketed. So many different situations, but you're correct in saying that we now have that kind of opportunity, perhaps of even greater magnitude, I would say. With digital property, with the future of money. So
yeah, I remember in the late 1990s, Zach, there was all these internet companies, and it reminds me so much of the crypto space right now. There was like, I'm sure you've heard of some of the memes from back then. It was like pets.com was a big one. And then there was this one, my friend was telling me there was an IPO that was going to be for millionaires.com. And I remember saying, well, what is millionaires.com? Like, what are they going to do? And he's like, you don't understand. That's where all the millionaires are going to go online. And I was like, oh my gosh, really? That sounds like a great company. But in my state of mind, I guess in the late 90s, I guess I'm in my late 20s. That was my kind of level of understanding. I thought, holy smokes, I better try to get some of this stuff when this goes public. So like you have this kind of, I did not have a well thought out financial context in which to evaluate these opportunities. So I was just chasing. And it so reminds me of people chasing crypto right now. But if I had just bought Amazon.com which was like a real business that was selling actual things back then, and just sat on Amazon.com, or the first time I used Google, and it was like the best search engine ever. And if I just bought Google and sat on it, you would have had this like epic 20-year run. Instead, there was a bunch of us getting millionaires.com and like pets.com and like trying to make the quick buck. And I just see that pattern repeating, except now I feel like we're talking about the money itself with Bitcoin. So it's a much grander scale of opportunity. And there's still all these people like chasing all these crypto things. And you're just trying to like shake your head and say, holy shit, would you just focus? Just focus on the Bitcoin. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent there, Zac. What are you up to now? Are you finished your degree now?
Yeah. Okay. So I graduated in June with my bachelor's of economics. And Congrats. For my last semester, I did an internship at the Human Rights Foundation with the Financial Freedom team. And that has now turned into my full-time job, where I'm helping lead the Financial Freedom Report at HRF, which is basically a weekly report covering all the ways that dictators are using the currency and their control over money to repress their populations, basically, whether that's, squandering protests, cutting activists off from the financial systems, hyperinflating their currencies to, enrich themselves at the detriment of the citizens in their country, and as well covering how people are using Bitcoin to fight back against those problems.
And how are you choosing topics for that? Like, so you finished university and you've decided on to basically tackle the world. So like, what are you going through there? Like, how do you choose the topics? Is this a team effort that you're writing about every week? How are you doing this?
Yeah, I mean, the newsletter itself is very much a team effort. Okay. I do the majority of the research and drafting for the newsletter, but I have a wonderful team that helps me, if I'm missing a topic that I didn't catch in that news week or news cycle or whatever, people are helping me out, pulling that for me, and helping. My editor is huge. Eileen is, she's been a huge help. But short answer is like a lot of research. Surprisingly, these sorts of events, I guess I would call them, happen all the time, which is both very sad, because these are terrible things where you're seeing authoritarian regimes weaponize their currency against the people, right? Like, this is in no way a good thing, but it gives us a lot to report on. And it's something that is not being discussed in mainstream media and making mainstream headlines. So the report will basically cover anytime, we see a dictator devalue the currency, like print a bunch of money, anytime any bank accounts are frozen, anytime transactions are censored, anytime transactions are being surveilled, basically anytime fiat is being abused to the detriment of the populace it's being used by, we are covering that story.
What are some of the topics or events or occurrences of this that are top of mind for you right now? Can you give a couple examples that you're covering right now?
Yeah,
or covered recently?
I mean, so for example, in Russia, this has actually been a reoccurring story, but basically anytime anyone has made like a donation to a Ukrainian charity, if they're Russian, they are basically immediately detained, arrested, and tried. This just happened to a Russian-American ballerina who lived in Los Angeles and went back to Russia to visit her family. And upon landing in Russia, was interrogated and had her phone taken away by Russian authorities, who found a donation, a $51 donation to Razum for Ukraine, which is a humanitarian charity that supports like children and the elderly. And she is now being sentenced to 12 years in prison for treason. So
Holy shit.
Yeah, so we're talking about like the lengths that Vladimir Putin will go to suppress any form of dissent and opposition, like even 12 years in prison for a $51 donation. And this is just one of hundreds of stories I've reported on. Another really interesting one was in Iran. The regime was auto-fining women who are non-compliant with hijab regulations, and they were just deducting the money straight out of their bank accounts. And that's only made possible because of fiat currency and its centralized nature, right? So they were using facial recognition technology and AI to surveil women that were not wearing hijab.
Come on.
And auto-fining it right out of their bank accounts, like $400, I believe.
They have the ability to use facial recognition currently to that extent?
it is actually scary how advanced some of these sorts of technological systems are outside of the West. And I mean, maybe they're the same here. We just don't know about it. But like when we're talking about China and Iran, like, yeah, this is a real thing.
So then what is some of your thinking around, I didn't anticipate us going down this rabbit hole, but like central bank digital currencies, is this just a natural evolution in some of these places where they can surveil the movement of money at an even greater level? Like fiat's digital, let's face it. But if you have a central bank digital currency that's completely centralized and there's no cash component to it, is this just an inevitable outcome in some of these systems and currently maybe in Canada and the US as well?
Yeah. So central bank digital currencies are at the top of our minds at HRF for sure. We are, at least on the financial freedom team, vehemently opposed to central bank digital currencies because they take all the problems that fiat currency already has and amplifies them and makes them like 10 times worse. Whether that is the ability for authoritarian regimes to surveil transactions, freeze transactions, censor transactions, freeze bank accounts. All of those things become so much easier when you have a currency that is centrally controlled by the central bank, and that is a digital, like is a liability of the central bank. So instead of having a layer of intermediaries like we do now in many places in the world, you're banking directly with the central bank, who, of course, even in places like the US and Canada, their independence is very questionable. And the way they give into political motivations is somewhat obvious to me, but that is even worse outside of like the Western world and in the global South, where these sort of institutions are basically at one with the government and function to fulfill their political needs. So yes, CBDCs are a threat to democracy, a threat to freedom, and should be on everyone's radar.
I'm going to ask you some of the tools that maybe you recommend people to consider or look into if they're going to go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. But first, do you think, is Bitcoin in its current state a viable alternative, or has the potential to be an alternative to these systems? Like, where are you on, I know you're obviously a Bitcoin fan, and we'll talk about Learning Bitcoin and the event that's coming up. I definitely want to talk about that. But as Bitcoin stands now, do you think it has the ability to, survive some of these threats or some of these alternative systems?
Well, I would say it is surviving and it is functioning today as a viable alternative to these systems. A really potent example of this is one of my coworkers on the financial freedom team, Anna Chekovich. She worked as the financial director for the Anti-Corruption Foundation in Russia. They're a leading human rights opposition group to Vladimir Putin. They're located in Russia. So naturally, Vladimir Putin immediately froze all of their assets, froze their bank accounts, and censored their transactions so that they cannot operate. They had to turn to financial rails that were not controllable by Putin or any politician. And there's only one option outside of the central bank rails, and that's Bitcoin. They turned to Bitcoin to pay their salaries, to pay their rent, and to continue functioning as an opposition to Putin. So it quite literally acted as a financial lifeline for them. And we hear these sorts of stories coming from individual activists as well as organizations such as ACF. So yes, I do think Bitcoin is a viable alternative. It is working as an alternative very well, actually, but there is still work to be done in terms of improving both the ability to have 8 billion people self-custody Bitcoin as well as financial privacy. Obviously, Bitcoin is a public ledger. And the blockchain can be analyzed to try to track transactions. Now, there are currently various tools that are kind of becoming more popular, like BIP47 payment codes, as well as silent payments, which is a static address protocol that allows basically people to receive donations in a more private way by generating a new address every time for donators, as well as Lightning offers quite a bit more privacy than on-chain Bitcoin. So there are solutions, and there are also more people building solutions. So we're really excited about open source development and FOSS software to help improve Bitcoin and combat the rise of central bank digital currencies.
Yeah, that actually gives me a lot of hope, because I remember back in my software days, the open source software was hard to stop, whether it would be a web server or a database technology. If it was open source, it kind of just took on a life of its own. And even big corporations who are dominating some of those spaces really couldn't stop those to evolve. Linux would be another example of that kind of thing. So that's where I get Bitcoin, and Bitcoin just seems like a bigger movement. So it does continue to give me hope. If somebody did want to make a donation of any sort in a semi-private way, is there a stack of Bitcoin tools? I might be putting you on the spot here, that they could use. I'm thinking of like the Freedom Convoy in Canada. And let's say somebody wanted to make a donation to it for whatever reason, they wanted to support it. Is there a way that they could have made a donation that you think that would have just protected them as the person donating in their identity? Would it be something as doing like a Lightning transaction to make a donation instead of like a fiat cash donation? Or is there anything on that topic you can share?
Yeah, I mean, Lightning could have been an option, not perfect privacy, but again, I would come back to silent payments. If a wallet provider had, so basically silent payments work on the surface for the user exactly the same as any other Bitcoin transaction, but under the hood are obscuring the origin of that donation.
And do some wallets have silent payments?
For example, Blue Wallet, Cake Wallet, Silentium, just off the top of my head, and I want to say Phoenix, all have silent payments now implemented. This has all happened over the last 2 to 3 months. To the indictment of the Samurai co-founders. So people are taking financial privacy a lot more seriously, which I think is really important. And
is that something in those wallets? Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's basically been implemented in the wallet. So if they generate, when they want to receive a donation, if they generate a silent payments address and share that address, it basically, instead of using the same address over and over again, it generates a new address every time that protects the information of the donor. So that would have actually, I mean, I can't say exactly how it would have worked in practice for something like the Freedom Convoy, but I, in theory, believe that actually would have successfully protected the identities of the donors. Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Because not everything's being centralized to one receiving address, I guess. A new address is being created all the time to receive new donations.
Yeah, and there's a little bit more going under the hood there.
Is there? Okay.
There's a bit more technicality going under the hood. I highly encourage you to check it out. There's a bunch of resources online. We also cover a lot of silent payment stuff in our newsletter, the Financial Freedom Report, just because it's become such a powerful tool for financial privacy on the Bitcoin network. So I'm really hoping to see more wallets implement this. Like, that's really the only barrier here is wallets need to implement it into their wallet, and then users can use it whenever they need. So,
okay.
And yeah, like you're saying, open source software, right? Like you can view this on GitHub and everything.
Yeah. So. Okay. And then, so how did you get involved? Like, why have you finished school and you're now with the Human Rights Foundation writing this Financial Freedom Report or participating or leading, in this? Why is this so important to you? I don't get it. You're like 24 years old. Like, why is this speaking to you so much? Where is this coming from? Is this something in your family's history and something how is this so important?
That is a great question. I don't even know if I have a completely thought out answer for something like that. It is, and this sounds kind of cheesy, but I always kind of had this feeling like I wanted to do something that was actually impactful, something that was actually going to make the world a better place. I wanted to leave the world a better place than I found it. And Bitcoin kind of immediately struck me as the best way to do that. And when I discovered, I came at Bitcoin from the perspective of economics and thought about it originally as money, as an investment. And I still see it as all of those things. But Bitcoin is so multifaceted. It touches so many aspects of life that when I started to learn and fall further down deeper into the rabbit hole and learn about, one, its environmental benefits, as well as its social benefits and its implication with human rights, those were the chords that really, really stuck for me. Because as much as I can just buy Bitcoin and number go up and I can see, have an incredible investment, I want this to be more than just number go up. I want this to be freedom go up. I want this to actually fulfill the vision of a better world, which I truly believe it can. I was very familiar with the work that HRF was doing and that Alex Gladstein was doing. He, right from the beginning, was a big inspiration for me, seeing him talk about human rights and Bitcoin. And reading his books and things like that. And so I was very inspired by the intersection of Bitcoin and human rights. And So that sort of led me to this internship. I also, in terms of like the writing side of things, it is sort of a running theme in my family. There's quite a few like writers and journalists and stuff like that. So I might have it didn't even occur to me until after the fact, but that sort of, it does run in the family a bit. But really, I'm just excited about Bitcoin and all the ways it can positively benefit us as a like global society. So I think, the human rights angle is easily the most potent example of that.
Well, I think you're doing great stuff. I don't know if you know this, people listening to this have probably heard this before, but my father went to jail in Croatia for 2 weeks for singing a song that wasn't approved by the communist government at the time. So they threw him in jail in a place called Makarska, right on the coast. It's a tourist place now, but our father was in jail there for 2 weeks. My aunt in Split, Croatia, was selling eggs, and at the side of the table, she was exchanging Yugoslavian dinars for German marks, and the government caught her doing that. She got thrown in jail for 4 months, and my father, who was in Canada, found out when it was written in the newspaper that was then sold in Canada that his sister was in jail. So, and it's funny enough, like, I don't think Canadians understand this, but when you live in a country like that, always at some point, there's a member of your family in jail. Like, if you're not on the right side of the political spectrum, there's always someone. I'm laughing. I shouldn't be laughing, but that's just how it is. Like, there's always someone in your direct family or slightly extended family that's in jail for some reason. They said something wrong. They did something that wasn't approved. And when you look back on that era that, my aunt, my father lived through, you just think, as growing up in Canada, you're like, I can't even fathom that. But that's just how they grew up. And I remember going there being told, don't sing this song. So as a Canadian kid in the 80s going there and you're being told, don't think this song, I didn't put that much thought into it at the time. But then reflecting back, like years and years later, I'm like, holy shit, like, they were serious. Like, I couldn't really sing that song. Everybody would be like getting in trouble from someone, or there was someone listening to kind of report you. So Bitcoin, to me, just directly from my family's history, has a lot of meaning, seeing how things are when they're oppressive. And just the future that you can have when everybody owns their time and labor is quite beautiful. So let's face the obvious. Okay, so then how do you get into this? You're roped into Learning Bitcoin. There's a cool event going on. What's how you're emceeing Learning Bitcoin? What's going on with Learning Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I'm going to be hosting and emceeing the event. Well, I being a writer and falling into the Bitcoin space, like I have a passion for education. I think that's kind of been the reoccurring theme I've noticed, whether that was with the club at university, whether that was writing on my own for my own publication, and now what I'm doing at HRF. Like, a lot of what my work centers around is helping people understand Bitcoin in the many different ways it can be understood, and helping meet people where they're at to help them understand how Bitcoin can benefit them. And so, Learning Bitcoin, it is something that Tristan approached me and some of my other colleagues with earlier this year, and we immediately wanted
Tristan being the event organizer.
Yeah, so Tristan is the event organizer, the wizard behind the scenes, if you will. He had this idea, and there's already a Bitcoin community in Victoria. So I'm heavily involved with the local Bitcoin community, as well as there's a BitDevs and the club at university. So between these sort of three entities, and the growing participation and attendance at these sorts of events and interest in general in Bitcoin that we're noticing, we immediately thought, like, what if we take this to the next level and have a educational focused conference right here in beautiful Victoria, BC. And this is an incredible location. Like, the venue is right next to the Inner Harbor.
I'm looking at the video you guys have on Learning. It's LearningBitcoin.ca if anyone wants to check it out. And like, just the website shows how beautiful the location is. Yeah, completely jealous.
It's absolutely gorgeous. Victoria is one of those kind of, like, it's a bit of a hidden gem. I wouldn't say that then again, because it's like one of the highest rents in Canada because it's so popular, but it is a hidden gem in the sense that it's located on the southern tip of Vancouver Island, and it is beautiful, mild, sunny weather, like, all summer long. It's very, like, small, but still a city. It has delicious restaurants. The whole thing. We have an amazing craft brewery scene. Really, it hits all the marks. And so I'm really excited to have an event right here in Victoria, and where we're bringing not only just Bitcoiners, because we are welcoming Bitcoiners with open arms. We want to see more Bitcoiners in Victoria and have them come out for this event, but we also want this event to be very much accessible. And so the main goal is to educate the Bitcoiners that don't even know they're Bitcoiners yet, to educate the no coiners and the people who have heard about Bitcoin and are curious about Bitcoin, but have not yet had the chance to dive down the rabbit hole, who haven't taken the orange pill yet. They want to know more about Bitcoin. It's on their minds, but they haven't had that call to action or that opportunity where someone can actually sit them down, both through which we'll be offering speakers and panels, but also workshops and hands-on experiences of how to use this thing, because it is a new technology. And to me, I see the biggest barrier to global Bitcoin adoption as is being education, at least here in the West, where, we don't necessarily have the same problems with money as people do, in the global South and things like that, where Bitcoin is very intuitive because they're dealing with hyperinflation and frozen bank accounts and centered transactions. But here, people often ask the questions like, why do I need Bitcoin? Like, what problem is this solving? What is the utility? Like, it's very easy because of our privilege to kind of gloss over how important Bitcoin is. I think the inflation we experienced and are still experiencing was a bit of a wake-up call for a lot of people. But basically, that's the goal of the event, is basically to educate the next wave of Bitcoiners and provide like a safe, open, enjoyable, and fun and light space to do so.
I heard you say safe there. I'm like, let's make it slightly dangerous. Let's just go crazy and just say what we mean on these things. I'm just joking with you. I understand what you're saying there. And so I'm looking at some of this. So Jeff Booth's going to be there, Seb Bunny, Troy Cross, Scott Dettles is going to be there. You guys have like a great lineup. So it's September 28th is this event. This is the first event, and it's currently a one-day event. Is that right? And I think Tristan said that you guys are going to try and do like a workshop or something where people get an address. I don't know if he's still thinking that, so I don't want to put words in his mouth. But can you tell us any more about some of the speakers or what you're trying to do there?
Of course. I mean, the goal was to bring in basically what I would consider world-class educators. So, I mean, among those people that you've named, you have what I would say are some of the people who can speak most eloquently to a no-coiner audience about Bitcoin and outline its merits. I mean, starting with Jeff Booth, right? I mean, he's the author of The Price of Tomorrow. I would say this is one of the most fundamental, not just Bitcoin books, but almost economic books for people who want to understand the problem of inflation, why inflation is not actually necessary in the economy, and why deflation is the key to an abundant future. So I'm really excited to have him up on stage talking about deflation and kind of laying out his thesis about the global economy and what Bitcoin means and its role it's going to play in this, because I think this is something that is not talked about enough and is totally, unintuitive in a way in the system that we live in. So
I think it took me 2 years. I think it took me 2 years. Like, I read his book and I'm like, okay, I understand that. Like, that was very powerful. And then I realized I didn't quite understand what he was saying. And I think it took me a full 2 years to get to have it deeply resonate with me and truly understand that this GDP number we're measuring and this fiat number, like how it's all bullshit, how we don't get the productivity. Like, not only do we have to suffer inflation, but we don't get the productivity gains that are supposed to come our way. That's how long it took me. And I'd like to say that, or think I was someone with that background in economics from 10 years of studying it, that I would be predisposed to understand this stuff quickly. And it still took me freaking 2 years, as embarrassing that is. I would send Jeff messages, and he's like, I think he was just politely coming back and saying, well, I thought you already understood that. And I'm like, no, Jeff, I don't know who you think you're dealing with over here, but no, I'm just understanding that now, So that's wild. Just the fact that he is speaking alone makes it awesome. Are you guys doing a workshop component there, or no? Is that going to be too complicated? I'm only asking because I'm curious.
So there are going to be multiple workshops. I don't have the full details of what those workshops are going to entail, but I expect that these are going to be workshops, both, forming the basics of like setting up a Bitcoin wallet, sending and receiving transactions, what it means to save and invest in Bitcoin, as well as going beyond that. So very much any attendees can expect, to be able to learn the basics of using Bitcoin. Alongside, speakers like Jeff, who are going to go, a bit beyond the just Bitcoin 101 stuff and touch more on like its global impact.
Yeah, cool.
And I mean, Jeff is absolutely wonderful. I think a lot of the stuff he says, like I think the reason it takes so long is because you have to unlearn what you've already learned and then learn the new thing, right? So it's like this full process. I'm also really excited to have Troy Cross with us in Victoria. He is probably one of the best, if not the best, at talking about Bitcoin mining and kind of demystifying that and a lot of the misconceptions. Like people think that because Bitcoin uses energy, it is therefore bad for the environment. But after one conversation with Troy Cross, you'll never believe that again. He is able to explain the ways that Bitcoin mining is benefiting, interacts with energy and is therefore benefiting grids, renewables, and the environment as a whole. So I'm really excited for him to kind of like get to dive into that and address some of those misconceptions, because Bitcoin mining is a whole other aspect of Bitcoin that people get really confused by or really don't like just inherently because they don't really understand how it works. And yeah, I mean, both Scott and Seb are incredible educators. Both of them have written amazing books, The Tao of Bitcoin and The Hidden Cost of Money. They both work at Block Rewards.
You guys have a stacked lineup, man. This is a stacked lineup.
I mean, it's education focused though. So, you're not like, all of these people, even though they can deliver very complex presentations, are going to keep it simplified so that everyone can understand still. But yeah, I'm really excited to welcome these people to Victoria.
Yeah, I do feel like we've moved. Like if I think about 4 years ago, I was told that Bitcoin would be outlawed by the government. Like the state of the conversation 4 years ago was that governments would shut it down and make it illegal. And it really wouldn't work. It was like this kind of toy thing that was a nuisance. And now just 4 years later, it's not only is it that kind of ship sailed. I mean, might come back in certain ways. Who knows? There's going to be a bumpy road ahead, I'm sure. But there's ETFs on it. And now you have the election in the US where you have presidential candidates talking about Bitcoin. Like we've moved the conversation has shifted so far in 4 years. It's just unfathomable to me to even try to perceive what we could be talking about 4 years from today. Like just from you're 24. So from like 20 to 24, where the conversation has shifted. By the time you're 28, like where are we going to be, what are we going to be talking about? It seems like it's moving faster than the internet to me. While I have you, I'd like to ask you, can you map out a bit of a stack for people on just like for privacy or for their human rights, if they want to communicate with friends and family? Like, are you like a proponent of Proton Mail and a certain type of hardware wallet? Like, is there like a tech stack? And I didn't prepare you for this. So I don't know if you have like and I'm not talking about like super advanced. When Len from the Canadian Bitcoiners was in here and he was talking to us about, running Tor with VPNs and like doing all this stuff. Do you have like a basic stack for people that just want like more privacy than the general stuff would get them? Is there something you could talk to there?
I don't necessarily give particular recommendations in terms of like what company you should be using, but I think it's pretty clear. One, the stuff Proton is doing is wonderful. They just unveiled Proton Wallet as well. So Proton has now taken the orange pill and have kind of like understood the financial freedom Bitcoin offers and are now offering a product to help people like, use Bitcoin, send and receive.
So is there email, as far as you're concerned? I'm not trying to say you're endorsing them by any means, but from what you understand, is Proton email still considered a much more private email client to use? If
you're comparing it to anything like Gmail or the likes of that, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So it's still kind of getting the thumbs up from you. Okay.
Yeah. The stuff they do, I mean, between Proton Mail, Proton VPN, and Proton Wallet, I think they have three really powerful tools. When I look at the world today, I see basically the most important tools for freedom are Bitcoin, Nostr, and VPNs. These are basically the only way you could achieve true financial freedom and transactional freedom, as well as like just internet freedom more broadly, because a lot of countries around the world, they have internet firewalls that completely restrict people's ability to like actually access the World Wide Web and the things that the services and the information they want to access. So VPNs are critical for that. Nostr is critical for free speech. I don't see any other way free speech can truly survive on these centralized social media platforms where censorship just runs rampant all the time. And then Bitcoin for transactional freedom.
I never thought about the importance of VPNs, but it's becoming more and more obvious to me that VPNs are critical. So if you're in a place where the internet access is controlled, you can circumvent some of that with a VPN?
For the most part. It's going to be circumstantial for sure. It'll depend on the VPN. It'll depend on the level of restriction from whatever regime is restricting the internet. But in a broad sense, yes, that is the idea. And this is really important because this actually relates back to people's ability to actually obtain Bitcoin, right? Like most on and off ramps these days are, exchanges, like online exchanges and things like that, right? And if a regime decides they're going to block access to that website, how do you get in and out of Bitcoin? Obviously there's always peer-to-peer and things like that. But these global platforms like Binance are used by so many people. Even though they might not be the best way to go about it, they are still an extremely powerful tool that are being used as peer-to-peer marketplaces and an on and off ramp in especially in the global south and things like that. So if a regime decides to block access to Binance, as has happened in places like Nigeria and more recently Venezuela, VPNs become a way to access Bitcoin, right? Like it's the tool that you use to get around that internet censorship.
So even in Canada, people should get familiar with how to run a VPN on your phone, how to run a VPN from your laptop or at home. It seems like a good piece of technology. You should be getting familiar.
Always be running a VPN, to be honest. Like I think that's it's
becoming more obvious to me.
And if you haven't created a Nostr profile, that is also should be top of the list. I don't know if your viewers are super familiar with it.
We haven't talked about it too much. I have a Nostr profile, and I tend to go through waves where I participate more in Nostr, and then I kind of sway away from it. But now just seeing, I think it was the European Union said they were going to shut down Twitter or X because of something, I can't remember what. You just constantly get these reminders oh my gosh, I better keep my Nostr profile pretty handy, and I better get people connected to me so I can keep communicating. So Nostr, I guess for anyone listening, just understand that the technology behind it makes it very difficult for a central authority to shut it down. Just the way that it works behind the scenes, there's not a central place where someone can point to you and say, shut this down. Nostr is kind of like this decentralized communications protocol. Zach, would that be a basic way to explain it?
Absolutely. And you can kind of think of it similar to Bitcoin in that way, right? But yeah, it's a decentralized communications protocol that has no central authority. So it's become sort of like this, and not everyone's using it as their daily driver social media. It doesn't it's not as intuitive, a little harder to set up. There isn't a set algorithm. So it's not as doesn't make you as addicted, which is actually a good thing, I would say. But right now, the way I see it is it's the backup. It's your backup digital social media profile identity right now, because we just don't know where the world is going. And with the power that we have given to these centralized social media corporations like Meta and Google and stuff like this, it's just, we've kind of set ourselves up for a dangerous future in that sense, giving them all of our data and their ability to control what we post and share online, especially when you're living in, again, authoritarian regimes. It's just so much worse outside of Western democracies.
I was going to say, like Canada. That was the first thing that came to my mind for a second. Right when you said that, I was going to say, blurt out, like Canada.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, you're also correct.
Which is wild to think and say, but I just think we all should have these tools. Why not?
Yes, have these tools set up and ready to use, even if you're not using them right now. Like having a Bitcoin wallet with some safety funds for a rainy day, as well as a digital online social media profile that can't be removed or censored. I think this is just two things that everyone should learn how to do and set up, because these are going to be tools for freedom as we go forward, especially if things take a darker turn than they already have.
Yeah, it kind of gives me a lot of hope for the future. I'm not going to lie that that first of all, that Bitcoin exists, that these technologies exist. And then Zac, that there's 24-year-olds like you taking on such big topics. Honestly, I mean, that for me at the age of 51 gives me a lot of hope for the future, that there's people like you out there talking with your friends and your buddies and doing this kind of stuff. And I know it's difficult and some people are going to think you're crazy and they don't understand where you're coming from. But the fact that there's all generations now participating in this, because you're Generation Z, like you're Generation Z, right? You're not
Gen Z,
not millennial. So, I mean, this is now covering a lot of age groups. And for me, that's kind of exciting because there's enough in the world right now to look around that makes you frustrated. There's inflation, there's censorship, there's these other global regimes that you're alluding to that are really make things difficult and make things look quite beautiful in Canada. Bitcoin and some of these technologies give me a lot of hope. I wonder how much turbulence there is ahead to come out the other side. But I believe through the other side is some greatness, Zac. You're going to be leading us there. You're the generation. You're already the generation.
Well, and that's what I've been saying about like my generation in general is like we kind of have to take this torch and lead it forward. And I would, consider myself a little bit of an anomaly. It's not everyone in my age that is doing these sorts of things and really cares about these sort of subjects. But I'm doing my best and my part to educate others and have, help them understand and, join me in caring about these things because like all of us, and when I say all of us, I mean like my generation definitely sees all these global issues, like we're concerned about the economy, but we're also concerned about the environment. And we're also concerned about all these human rights abuses going on at home and beyond. And really, Bitcoin kind of addresses all of these things just by, being used and being adopted and like having it rise to a global standard for a currency could just, the downstream effects of that are so profound and so deep. But it is going to be an uphill battle. Like, I just don't see how this is just going to it's not going to be a merry time.
Agreed. Sure.
This happens in a happy way and there's no fight to be had and there's no attack from the other side of this. Or that things have to get like really bad. That's something that also concerns me, is a lot of the time pain is the best teacher and it's not a happy reality, but sometimes, people need to experience 20, 30% inflation to realize, hey, like this money doesn't work and I need a different solution. So, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball either. I don't know what's going to happen, but, having these tools set up as a backup at the very least.
Well, think of it. My aunt who got arrested, she didn't have a VPN. She didn't have Nostr and she didn't have access to Bitcoin. Yeah. Right. So think of the mindset that you're living in then and there in that time of history. So you're right. Unfortunately, history has to repeat a bit and there's some pain ahead. But the fact that these tools exist is like it just gives hope to anyone listening out there. Like things are great. The fact that you can have all these on your phone too, it's just magical.
Well, it's very accessible. Like basically anyone with an internet connection and a smartphone has access to these tools. And that's just a growing number of the population, higher and higher in percentage.
Agreed.
I mean, prior to discovering Bitcoin, I'm going to come clean here. Like I was a bit of a doomer, like not in the sense that I was like, telling people the world was going to end, but in the sense that I, at a fundamental level was like, the world is getting so much worse and I don't see any solutions. Like, what is the solution? It's what drew me to real estate. Real estate and things. Then it was like the real estate was the only thing I could see that would help me kind of have financial freedom to live life on my own terms. It was like, okay, there's this one thing that looks like it gives me the leverage to outpace the debasement that's going on in this country of like 7% compounded every year, no matter what. But then Bitcoin just introduces this whole other element that you're like, oh my gosh, let's just change the money system at the core, at the base level, so it's just kind of the next level of greatness. Yeah. So, and that was Bitcoin for me, right? Like it's the thing that now gives me hope.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like if you just pull out, it's an interesting exercise. Like if you just put a little spreadsheet together and if you're able to accumulate a fiat dollar amount of Bitcoin, if that's how you're going to measure Bitcoin currently, which would be normal for most people, and just put a compound annual growth rate on the Bitcoin of whatever you think. I mean, the last 4 years, it's about 53% from 4 years ago to today, compound annual growth. And if you just take Michael Saylor's point or anyone's point, they think, and maybe it comes down in stages, that compound annual growth rate. So if you put a spreadsheet together and grow whatever you're able to accumulate 20, 30 years, and then the number that comes out the other side is just almost unbelievable. So that alone should just, that's an exercise I think everybody should do, because when you start seeing what's possible with compound annual growth rates that are greater than 7% in a thing that you're able to save in currently today, the future is definitely bright. So LearningBitcoin.ca is the URL for the event, September 28th. And then where can people go to find the Financial Freedom Report?
That's at financialfreedomreport.org. If that doesn't work, just head to HRF's website, the Human Rights Foundation, and you can click our programs, and there'll be a drop down that says Financial Freedom. You can read about what our program does. We have a grant program, as well as a bunch of educational endeavors and webinars for activists and nonprofits. But there's a box for the Financial Freedom Report. Highly recommend, anyone Bitcoin curious and their friends and family both, subscribe to the Financial Freedom Report and also come out to Learning Bitcoin. I think do those two things and your life will change for the better within like 6 months, probably.
Agreed. So I think, and then what about you, Zach? Where can they find you? Is X the best place? Twitter?
I definitely post probably most on Twitter.
What's your handle?
My handle is Zac Guignard, at Zac Guignard. The name, it just says Zac G. You'll recognize me. I got a profile picture and everything. It'll say Financial Freedom and HRF. So feel free to follow me there, follow along on the adventures. I'll be tweeting more about learning Bitcoin as well as the stuff we're doing at HRF, and just sharing my thoughts along this crazy ride we're on.
Cool. Well, I got to thank Tristan for putting us in touch. Zach, you didn't know us, so thanks for doing this. I really wanted to promote what you guys were doing. So you kind of came in here blind, so I appreciate this. I'm in awe at the amount of wisdom you already have at your age. So just keep freaking going, dude. We really need this, and really inspired by what you're doing with the Financial Freedom Report and the Human Rights Foundation. I mean, really cool stuff. So Zach, you're an inspiration, man. Keep going.
Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate it.